Hey, what's up, fellow anglers? It's Aaron LeSueur here, and I've got a fishing report for you. California Delta. I was out there for 2.5 days from Sunday through Tuesday. Fished for about 30 hours out there, filming, fishing, and it was a blast. The conditions out there are changing quite a bit since we had all that hot weather for what seemed like forever. We're finally getting some fall-like weather. I've got some conditions for you that were pretty, I would say this about the same throughout the 3 days. It was pretty windy out there and the weather was pretty mild. So I'm thinking the bite is really starting to turn on. I had about 40 fish in those 2.5 days. Now, nothing big. Now, because I was throwing a lot of reaction baits and I was trying to cover a lot of water. I didn't do any punching. I didn't do any frogging. What else? Big fish style techniques. So I was basically covering water and trying to move fast, find areas, look for active fish, and catch as many as I could. I caught a bunch of solid ones. I'm going to go over all the baits that I used, some of the areas that I focused on to give you some ideas on what's going on out there. So let's first of all start with where I focused on. It was pretty much the middle delta from about B&W. I went down as far as Bullfrog Marina and that Mildred area. So I kind of stayed in that middle delta area. And I was focusing basically on riprap walls, and I did catch some fish out in some deeper weed areas. Now I've got a ton of footage that I've got over those 2.5 days. So you're going to want to stay tuned because I've got some in-detailed video footage of catches, areas, how I caught them, where I caught them. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that information. So let's talk about the couple of different areas that I caught some of these fish and what I was looking for. Mainly, I was looking for rip-rap banks that were wind-blown and had some current going across them and had some of those sparse weeds, not the big hydrilla mats that get all that gorilla hair looking style, don't know the name of that weed, up on top of it. This had to be clean weeds, and I wanted them to be sparse for the fish to have some ambush points and not a lot of areas for them to hide in. So if it had any of the hyacinth mats or some other areas where it was a long and expansive where they could have been anywhere, I didn't focus on those. I focused on where they had only some small areas to hide so I could make precise casts and target those areas. They're a little easier visually when I'm out there to see just those small areas versus a big vast flat where I don't even, you have to go through and cover a bunch of water and don't know really where to start or what to target when you're out there. Just made it a little bit easier. So those riprap banks and those weedy areas were what I was targeting, and especially I was targeting some of those areas that were on points. I wanted to make sure that some of those specific setups were on the points as well, and that did produce some really good quality bites when I found all of that on one area. A point, some sparse toolies as well, and those sparse weeds that I was looking for. Now, because I was out there for 2.5 days and I fished from basically sun up to sundown, I did get a lot of different tide conditions. So I'll give you what the tide chart looked like on that day. And it moves, I think it's 45 or 45 minutes forward every day. So I'm just gonna give you the general tides on what I fished when I was out there. So let's go over some of the baits that I used to catch all those fish. I got about 4 setups here. Let's take a look at those real quick. So the first setup I used, which I didn't use a whole lot of, I used it on the first day and in just one little area in the evening, was a drop shot. I did find some fish that were out in about 6 to 8 feet relating to a little bit of a weed edge off a flat, and I caught them cranking, and then I went back and slowed down and I caught them on a drop shot. And it's just a 7-inch Robo Worm. I'm gonna get a little closer so I can show you all the setups here. So basically 7-inch Robo Worm. This is the FX series. I'm gonna put what the color is. I don't know exactly what it is offhand right now. It's just basically green with about a 12 to 16-inch drop from the hook to a 1/4 ounce teardrop weight. I just have it on a Gamakatsu 2-aught, not a super line, just a thin wire hook, making it weedless because I was pulling it through the weeds. What I was doing with this bait was basically throwing it out to where I caught some of those fish on the crankbait and Basically just pulling it through the weeds really slowly, pulling it up, letting it fall down, just lightly shaking it for a second, and just kind of kept it moving towards the boat, and then they would just grab it, and I could set the hook on them. Now I've got a 15-pound fluoro leader on here, P-line, a double uni knot to a 20-pound braid on this setup, and it's on my Dobbins rod. It's a 703C, a good all-around rod I like to use for worming. Long enough to make good casts, it's got a soft enough tip to make some accurate casts, and then plenty of backbone all the way through there. It's the Champion Series 703C full cork handle. Oh, excuse me, it's a split handle. It didn't say SH on here, so I forgot I have a split handle on this one. And on the Abu Garcia Revo STX 6.4-1. So I just do that on the first day because I got on such a good reaction bite that I never wanted to slow down once I started getting on this bite and kind of figuring out where they were, so I just kept covering water and moving around. So I threw the crankbait a couple of those days, except for the third day I never picked it up. Now I cranked on that first day on these fish that I found on that weed flat that were kind of on the edge. So I wanted something that get down there pretty deep. And then this is the Damiki DC 300. Goes about 10 to 12 feet. I got a couple Gamakatsu short shank hooks on there so they don't get hooked up on each other. So I'm pretty much always changing the hooks out on these. And they're still gonna get hooked, but because of the short shank, they're gonna be less likely to hook up on themselves and foul up during the cast. And I've got a snap on here. I wanted to put a crankbait on there that went a little less deep, like say 6 to 8 feet. I just unsnap it real quick, make the change so I don't have to retie it, and just saves me a little bit of time out there. And I got this on 20-pound braid, straight to the bait, no leader. And basically what I was doing on this one is I was casting, on the first day I was casting it out on that weed edge and just cranking it back to the boat, making sure it was digging into those weeds. And then when it would get stuck, I would just snap it out of there real fast to try to entice some of those reaction strikes. And I have it on the Dobbins, it's a 705 crankbait rod, the CB. Again, got great parabolic on this, makes accurate casts, and enough backbone to work those fish out of the cover when they would dig in. It's on, again, Abu Garcia Revo STX. This happens to be a full cork handle on the Dobbins rod. I also threw that on day 2. I went on a long stretch of bank that had sparse weeds again, and it made a turn on the river, and I was just out there having fun, just cranking it and covering water to see how many fish I could catch in this one little stretch that on the San Joaquin. Caught a bunch of fish doing that. Then also on day 2, it was really windy out there, and I was looking for points, island points at first. I was kind of in Frank's, and man, it was so windy in there, I decided to just kind of stay on the outskirts and fish out there, and caught some good fish out over there. But then I moved down towards the middle of the Delta more, looking for some of those points that I had mentioned, and I just started throwing this spinnerbait around, and I was catching so many fish on this thing, like 40 fish in those 2.5 days. I just did not want to put it down. I'll tell you one thing. On that third day, towards the afternoon, it did get really slow. The wind had died down a little bit. It got a little warmer, and the bite changed. And I didn't adjust to it. Well, I still caught some fish, but just not nearly as many. I think I needed to kind of run around the Delta more, looking for some more wind against those banks, and look for some of those areas. But I did catch a bunch, and this was the main bait I was throwing. It's a 1/2 ounce. It's the Damiki MTB spinnerbait. And I don't even know the color of this one. I'll have to look it up, and I'll put it on the screen here. But it's just a silver bottom, and it's got this green on the top. And I do have a Kitech on here. I think this is the green flash. It's a 3.8. It matches up perfectly on this bait. It's got that green on the top and a two-tone color on there. I love to throw everything on my swim baits. It's always going to be two-tone. And I've got this 20-pound braid, and basically what I was just doing, I was just kind of covering water, throwing this in the pockets of the weeds or pockets of the toolies, or paralleling a weed line that was on that point, and just covering a bunch of water. And I did, on some of the deeper points, I would throw this out and count down to about 3 or 4 and kind of let that thing get really deep in about 6 to 8 feet, and then just slowly roll that thing back to the boat. Or, like I said, I was casting it towards these pockets, and then since it was a little shallower up there, then I would retrieve it as soon as it would hit the water. Now I do have this currently on straight braid 20-pound, but I wouldn't recommend that because the braid is so limp, and when you let that bait fall, it tends to hook up on the back of this hook or get stuck in the willow leaves as it's going down, or the willow leaf blades. So I got lazy at the end because I did break off a big one, and I didn't put another leader on there, which I should have. So 15, but more likely 20-pound P-line leader on there, a fluoro. Give yourself about 3 feet and a double uni knot together. And then when it falls, the line is so stiff that it won't get caught up in this hook or in the blades as often, so you're not going to be fouling up as many casts. Because on the braid, you might foul up like 1 out of every 5, and then that 5th cast, you could have put it in the right spot and there could have been a fish there, and then you got fouled up, and so then right then you just cost yourself a bite. So yeah, let's do a 20-pound leader. I would recommend that, or 15 to 20. Now I am throwing this on my Dobbins. This is the 734 CSH. It is another split handle. I like this the 7'3" for spinner baits because I can get a long cast, and these things catch a lot of wind. So having that extra 3 inches gives me that little bit of extra castability to make those long casts, and that 4 power really helps drive that single hook home on the bass when you make that hook set as the tip goes down into the backbone there. So 734 is pretty much my go-to spinner bait rod from Dobbins. Again, Abu Garcia 6-4-1 on this. Let's talk about the last bait that I used, and obviously it's one that I love to throw out there. You see me throw this bait a lot. It's the Whopper Plopper. So along those same areas of the spinner bait, I was throwing the Whopper Plopper in those same areas and getting good quality bites. So I would just kind of alternate depending on how much chop was on the water and what else did I decide? I think I was just go through once with one bait is basically what I did, and then I'd go through a second time with the other bait to see if I could pick up some different fish that would react to either one of the baits. Now this one just happens to be the 130 in powder. Now they don't make a silent version of this, at least that I could find, and I don't think they make one. So what I did was I first took a flashlight, because there's a couple of, I don't know if you call them zones, but they're partitioned. They have there's an area in here where it separates the front from the back of this bait, and so I flashed a flashlight in there and marked a couple holes on the top where I wanted to drill, and I kind of had to experiment with the bit size to find out which one was going to be large enough to allow those little weights to come out. Now, they made a change on this bait from the earlier versions. The earlier version, the weights were metal BBs, and these just happened to be plastic. So it didn't do a whole lot of a weight change on there because they're so light, but I just wanted that noise out of there because I don't think this bait needs those rattles. So I did this to all the versions I had that had rattles, drilled the holes, and then I filled them with clear silicone. So filled up the holes once I drilled it and got everything out, just put some silicone on there to make them waterproof again, and it worked perfect. Basically throwing them in those same areas, doing a couple different retrieves. I would do a straight retrieve, and then I would pause it for a second and give it a little rip just to mix it up. I don't like to just do a straight retrieve out there. I'm trying to get those fish to react, and sometimes a little rip or a pause or something like that is going to get that fish to come up. I got 65-pound braid on this. Use that out there because you throw these in the toolies every so often, and if you get it up there in the toolies, you can just get that thing bent over and just really yank on it and pull it out so you're not having to go into the toolies and get it. And it alleviates the need to take your boat and go in there and possibly mess up the area where you can make another cast in and get a bite. Now I'm throwing it on the Dobbins, this glass rod. I've been using this here for the last couple months, and I really do like it on this bait. It's the Dobbins DC 735 CB glass. That's a mouthful. Great parabolic on this. It's good castability, and it loads up awesome when those fish hit this. And then I don't think I lost a single fish this weekend on this bait when I hooked them up. Never came off. So awesome setup on there. It's my go-to rod right now with the Whopper Plopper 130. It works really well. Again, Abu Garcia Revo STX 6-4-1. It's pretty much a consistent gear ratio on my reels, unless I need a high-speed reel if I'm doing something different, flipping or frogging, or a low-speed reel if I'm throwing a swim bait. Those are basically all the setups. Caught a bunch of fish out there. I have been seeing on social media some guys are really starting to catch them out there using different techniques. Some punching, some frogs are going to catch some of your bigger fish. But if you just want to go out there and cover water and catch a lot of fish, Like I said, I didn't catch anything over 4 pounds, but I caught a bunch of solid ones. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you're following me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm going to put out the notifications when those come out so you can see more in-depth and details on how I caught the fish, where I caught the fish, and from some cast to catch footage. So make sure if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumbs down. It's up to you. Drop a comment if you want. Subscribe if you already don't. I'm Aaron LeSueur. Stay focused, fish hard, and I'll see you out on the water.